Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Rachel Siegel, the Director of Strategic Programs at Illuminate. Welcome to our Crown Jewel Conversation Series. Illuminate is a catalyst for social change for women's advancement, equity, and justice. We have created the collective to strengthen and advance Jewish women's leadership globally through the creation of a transformative network to achieve the social change we seek. Illuminate invests in Jewish entrepreneurial women executives and leaders. We call them Jewels, who are devoting their lives to tackling society's most pressing issues throughout the United States, Israel, and around the globe. Each year, we select 10 women to be in the collective's cohort-based leadership advancement program, which fosters connections, encourages partnerships, provides resources, and a curriculum tailored to meet their needs. Our global network is now 60 women strong. Our conversation today features one of these incredible jewels. Kerry Brodie is the founder and executive director of Emma's Torch. She is a recipient of the Gaudium Award for the Brooklyn Institute and a 2020 JWI Woman to Watch. She has been featured on CNN Heroes, The Forward 50, City and State's 40 Under 40, and 36 Under 36, among many others. Kerry is a graduate of the Institute of Culinary Education, where she received the Wusthof Award for Leadership and was named the ACCSC Graduate of the Year. She holds a master's in government from Johns Hopkins University and a bachelor's in Near Eastern Studies from Princeton University. Please write any questions that you have for Kerry in the chat, and we will do our best to incorporate them if time allows. To begin the conversation, I'm pleased to introduce Illuminate's immediate past president, Rachel Weinstein.
Thank you, Rachel. Whenever I listen to you list the credentials of our jewels, I'm just like, I'm blown away. And Kerry, I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. I've been following your work for many years now, and we've never really had the opportunity to like dig in and get into sort of like the details of how it all began and how it all works. So I'm thrilled to have this opportunity. And before we get to all that incredible work that you're doing, it would be great to just hear a little bit about your personal story and what inspired you to create Emma's Torch.
Thank you so much, Rachel, and Rachel Siegel as well, and really to everybody. I feel like I'm with family here in that I've just been so much of my journey with Emma's Torch has been alongside Illuminate and the team. So I'm just so incredibly grateful. I sometimes joke that my personal story is so deeply boring that it becomes almost like its own thing. Like, how cool is it to be this boring? But for me, the work that I do at Emma's Torch is really driven by the idea that the story of my life, my personal experience, is the greatest privilege and the greatest fortune that I have of being in this position at this moment. My great-grandparents fled to Lithuania during World War II and ended up in South Africa. As most South African Jews came from Lithuania, it was the only country that was left opening its doors to them when the Nazis took over Lithuania. And then the story of South African Jewry is one also of seeing injustice in their society. And many, like my parents, left in the 1980s saying, this is the country that opened its doors to us, but it's not the country where we will raise our children. It does not align with our values, and this is not where we want to be. And they came to the United States. And I think about this a lot because every time I talk to somebody about Emma's Torch, their story is also a story of refugees coming to a new country, of seeing society around them, of wanting to build a better future for their children, and about the mechanisms of ways that they do that. And so I grew up thinking I was going to work in public policy. I was a kid who grew up watching The West Wing. I wanted to be Sam Seaborn. And I had incredible opportunities early in my career to work at the Israeli embassy and then at the Human Rights Campaign. But I realized that this story, this family story, the idea of how we welcome in the newest arrivals was the thing that was occupying most of my thoughts. And so that's how I ended up leaving that work, even as much as I enjoyed it, to create Emma's Torch.
So let's like go back to the very beginning and like let's talk about the roots, because you started here in New York and Brooklyn. So how did it all begin, and what were your goals starting out?
So it really all began with the most important question that anybody's ever asked me. My husband, who jokes that it was much more consequential than asking me to marry him, was asking me, why not you? I told him I had this idea, someone should do it. Like, how great would it be? We could have this restaurant, refugees could be trained, this would just solve all these problems, and someone should do it, and I could go work for them. And his question was, why not you? Why can't you be that person? And that question changed my life, because I think frequently we think someone else can do things, or who am I to do these things? But framing it as, why not you? So I started figuring out the answers to that question. I reached out to mentors, advisors, people whose names I could find on LinkedIn to get advice, to hear, does this idea, does creating a pipeline into the workforce through the culinary industry for the newest arrivals in our community, does that work? Does that solve a problem? And does that already exist? Because I was very aware that I was a naive 25-year-old, and I didn't want to be distracting from these real problems. And overwhelmingly, the responses were, yes, we need this, and here's who else you should speak to. And that really created this thread. So I moved to New York, which I was very nervous about. We moved, I didn't know how to use the subway, and I fell in love with the city as I was going to culinary school, as I was working in different restaurants, trying to learn as much as possible and meeting the people who helped to turn this idea into a reality. We moved to New York, and then about 6 months later, we decided to have our first Emma's Torch event. So we did an 18-hour training program with 3 students, and we had this big catered event that I worked in the kitchen with the students. We had a lot of people come in, and the funds that we raised during that event is what allowed us to take on a very short-term lease in Brooklyn and Red Hook. And we decided to try it. Let's see what happens. Can we get this off the ground for 6 months? Does it work for the students? Do they start jobs? How does the community react? And while it wasn't easy, the overwhelming response was yes to all of those questions. So at the end of that 6 months, we were able to take on a longer term lease in what's now our flagship restaurant in Carroll Gardens.
It's incredible. It's incredible. I mean, you started with 3, and I know you've grown exponentially over the last 7 years. So, talk a little bit about that growth and how the organization has grown and the impact that you've had on the people that you're serving.
Thank you. It's exciting to look back, because when you're doing the thing, you don't always pick up on how much things are changing and growing and expanding. In the last 7 years, we've had the honor of working with closing in on 500 students at this point. We now have, we opened that first location in Carroll Gardens, and pretty soon after, we were approached by the Brooklyn Public Library to run their cafe program. Soon after that, we launched our catering business. And now we also have a location in DC, which is both cafe, and we also do some large scale catering here. And that's been the business growth, but the real growth has been the students. So we started with a small group of students, and we very quickly realized that we needed to be doing more. The challenge is getting bigger, not smaller. When I started Emma's Torch, there were 65 million displaced people around the world. That number is well over 100 million right now. And at the same time, we also wanted to be attuned to what are the real needs. So some things haven't changed. We have always been committed to paying our students full-time wages while they're in our program, whether they're in an English class, a literacy program, whatever it may be. We want to ensure that we are meeting the needs of individuals who cannot afford to go 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks without a paycheck. And the other thing that stayed the same is that we're really embedded in the culinary industry. Our culinary instructors work in the industry. They are the best contact for our students. They know about the job market. And so that process has been really important, because it's not only meant that our students have jobs waiting for them, something that I've been really proud of, we've seen restaurant owners really step up in this conversation around immigration. Last September, Danny Meyer was one of the leading voices advocating for work authorization for the newest arrivals in our community. The coalition behind him were all employment partners of Emma's Torch. And so we're really proud of the community we've built. But I'm also a little bit of a data nerd. And so we always wanted to make sure that every time we graduate a cohort, every month, we know that we are stewarding the resources that have been entrusted to us and the trust that our students are placing in us. So what we look at is, we want to know about people's wage growth over time, job placement, and job retention. And so we have like a little nifty return on investment calculator. But more than that, what we've seen is we've created $8.5 million of increased wages. And that doesn't just serve our students, it serves their families, it serves their communities, it serves all of us, because it enriches the entire community. And so we're really proud of that impact that we see on the micro level and then as it expands outward.
I mean, it's just incredible. And I think it's really important what you're saying too, right? I think, you know, you're not a political organization, but that $8.5 million of increased wages, that pays taxes. So for all the people who are saying about what immigrants are taking out of our society, they're also adding tremendous amounts as well. And so I think that's so important to share. I mean, the numbers that you quoted about the increase in refugees, you know, are staggering. Can you talk like kind of from a zoomed out perspective, what are some of the trends that you're seeing in terms of, you know, refugee resettlement over the last several years?
Absolutely. One of the things that I think is kind of interesting coming from public policy, but then working on a really grassroots level with our students is you have to believe, you know, the Jewish proverb that if you save a single life, it's like you've saved the entire world. You have to fundamentally believe that because you're working with individuals and you're seeing this enormous challenge. On our end, what we've seen is this huge increase in need across both DC and New York, but really nationwide. We're seeing more people being let into the country, which we think is a tremendously good thing. But there are, especially coming out of COVID, there are fewer and fewer resources available to them. And there's a lot of programs that are not actually set up to empower individuals to build their own lives. And so what I mean by that is we're seeing opportunities, but they aren't paid for individuals, or we're seeing opportunities, but if people begin working, then they might lose housing access, or the housing is so unstable that what we've seen with a number of our students, about 70% of our students experience housing instability. We get them into jobs trying to save money so that they can move out and get into more stable housing. But suddenly the shelter where they're staying there'll be an eviction notice. And so we're seeing these, you know, at the high level, we're hearing that there's just too many people coming in. And I don't think that's true. I think that there is a little bit of a question around how we're helping people access the resources that exist and how we're ensuring that the resources that exist set people up for success. And so that's been something that we're really working on navigating. We've had more applicants in the first quarter of this year than all of last year, and last year set a record of number of applicants. We're trying to expand. We're hopefully going to be opening a second program site and doubling the number of students in New York over the next 18 to 24 months. But we know that we're not alone in this work. And so we're also working with other partners to see if we can help them build out programs similar to ours.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about that, about how you go about recruiting your trainees.
We always say it takes a village. And I think when it comes to refugee resettlement and helping people build new lives, that's even more true. And so when I started Emma's Torch, the first thing I did was I built relationships with refugee resettlement agencies so that they could advise on the program, they could answer a lot of questions, they could give us legitimacy and also give us some harsh feedback. But those initial relationships are how individuals found out about our program. We started out with 9 partners, and now we have more than 100 partnerships with shelters for survivors of domestic abuse, centers for survivors of torture, mental health resources, food distribution centers. Anywhere where somebody might be getting a resource, we want to be there as a partner so that they can hear about our work. It also means that when somebody, as often is the case, hears about us through a friend and comes to Emma's Torch, if we find out that they don't have a case manager or that they're struggling with legal challenges around family reunification, we have warm reciprocal relationships with other organizations so that we can help them get those problems solved. Because at the end of the day, no single organization is going to be able to change everything. But if we come together, I think that we can do so much more.
I think that you saying it takes a village speaks highly to that. I mean, they're coming with nothing. And so they need so many resources, and that you have those connections is amazing. Okay, so you're a data nerd. So I'm going to hit you up for some numbers. Like, you know, tell us, when you say you've had, you know, more than double the applications, like how many applications do you receive a year? How many people can you take? And I guess, you know, with all that overwhelming demand, what criteria are you using to select these trainees?
Yeah, so last year we had nearly 1,000 applicants for 125 slots, which was really hard. We want to get to yes. So when we're doing the interview process, we really are trying to find individuals for whom what we always talk about as our team and with our rubric for selection is this the right intervention at the right time for this individual? Sometimes it might not be the right intervention at the right time. We sometimes see with survivors of human trafficking that there is a lot of work around trauma that needs to be done before they can engage in the workforce again. And we have to have the humility to say, not never, but not right now. And here is how we are going to stand beside you as you seek out these other resources. And then when it comes down to it, it's a really hard process. We had to close our applications in June. We're reopening them now, but we had to put a pause for a month because the last thing we wanted was to have people just sitting and waiting and languishing on a wait list. But the way it works is that we have a rubric for selection. We're looking for individuals who are passionate about working in the culinary industry. Their dream doesn't have to be a chef. If their dream is, I want to have a stable job where I can send money home to my family, amazing. Let's do that in the culinary industry. If their dream is, I want to open a restaurant, also amazing. And we've seen students go on and do that. We really think that empowerment is about giving people options. The other thing that we're really looking for is availability. Something that we struggle with is we are a full-time job. If you enroll in Elma's Torch, you're working with us 40 hours a week, which for a lot of our students, about 2/3 of whom are women, and often are the sole providers of childcare in their homes, can be a really big barrier. So we do try and find partners and work with other organizations around finding solutions, but we find that that's sometimes a barrier to entry. And then the final one is the legal one, where we pay people on the books. It helps establish credit. It helps them be eligible for other benefits. It does mean that we can only work with individuals with valid US work authorization, which right now, at least, we're seeing coming in earlier in that asylum process. We'll see that changes is highly variable based on political realities. So we're going to just keep on monitoring that as well.
Yeah. How long are they usually with you? Or is it staggered when they're ready, they graduate? Or is it like it's a 6-week program, everyone starts together, everyone leaves together? How does that work?
So it's a cohort model, and our students are with us for 11 weeks, so about 2 months. And we find that by the end of it, sometimes students don't want to leave, but we know they're ready. And we start working on job placement around halfway through the program. So our goal is to have graduate on a Thursday, you start that new job on a Friday. Sometimes it takes a few more days. But what's also nice is so our students go through the program as a cohort. So they have each other. And then we start a new group every month. So there's always a group that's farther along and a group that's just starting. And they build these beautiful relationships. And it's really special to see students who might have a little bit less confidence when they get into that second half of the program and they see someone starting and they say, oh, here's all the things that I know now, or here's how I can help that person. It's amazing to see how it changes their approach. And it's a really good reminder to them. So often the refugee experience is one where individuals are being stripped of their human dignity, and reminding them like, no, you have all of this power within you, and you are valued here. It takes time, and it's not enough just to say it. We have to really live it. But I find that that works really well with a cohort model.
I really love the thoughtful attention to detail that you've given to building this in terms of how they come in, how they exist within, how they leave, where they go. It's like, it's beautiful. Like, look, I'm getting emotional. And it's so Jewish. It's so Jewish what you're doing. I mean, this whole conversation about preserving an individual's dignity, the teach a man a fish, it's really, you know, I don't think people would necessarily see it that way, right? You're not serving Jewish people, but it's so very Jewish what you're doing. It's really beautiful. Tell us a little bit about the profile of your trainees. I mean, what is their demographic? How old are they? What percentage are women? What are their language skills? How long have they been here? Sort of like, what does that look like?
Absolutely. And I love what you said, because frequently I get asked, is Emma's Torch a Jewish organization? And it isn't. We are a non-religious organization. But for me, at least as a Jewish woman, it's the most Jewish that I ever feel, is getting to work here and getting to work on these values. And I like to think that Emma Lazarus, who is a Jewish lady that we're named after, would have related to that as well. Our students come from all over the world. We work with individuals from 42 different countries, about 2/3 of whom are women, most of whom have children. We are starting to see more and more students between the ages of 18 and 25, so a younger demographic than we've seen historically. And we see trends. I sometimes describe it to people that if you open a newspaper 6 months from now, whoever was on the headline of that newspaper is who we'll end up seeing. We are not the first responders. We support the first responders. But for example, when the war broke out in Ukraine, people came to us saying, what can we do with Emma's Torch? Not with Emma's Torch. Here's some amazing organizations that you should be supporting right now. 6 months from now is when we started to see Ukrainian new arrivals. And so we right now are seeing a lot of students from Ukraine. We're seeing a lot from Afghanistan, Central and South America, of course. Not as many as we used to see from the Middle East. When I was starting, most of the students we were seeing in very early days were from the Middle East. And then there was a ban on a lot of resettlement, which has also been interesting to see. When we started, we worked primarily with individuals who had been in the country, let's say between 3 and 5 years, mostly because nobody was coming into the country or getting work authorization in 2017. Now we're seeing that change. We're seeing really recent arrivals, and it's something that we really pride ourselves on, is that we approach that question with humility. The needs of somebody who arrived from Ukraine 6 months ago are very different from somebody who arrived from Haiti 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Nobody's needs are more valid, but we need to be addressing people where they are. We have a wide range of educational backgrounds. We have students who have never had the opportunity to have formal education, and we have students with PhDs. It's a really wide range. And we have wide range on the English side. We look for individuals who have at least a baseline of English for safety. So if somebody's yelling behind you, you'll react appropriately, but we do English classes specifically for the culinary industry. And so compared to a lot of other workforce programs, we tend to get we are able to accept more people because culinary skills are such a visual. And so our students are using their phones, they're recording. And then outside of that, our students are so different from one another. But one of the things that I think really is a common thread from all of them is actually somebody else in the collective at one of our gatherings with Illuminate said that hope is a verb. And I think about that with our students. Our students exercise hope as a verb. And I think that transcends ages, barriers, experiences, how they're connecting to their new community. I think that the one common thread is this idea that we have to live in hope and we have to exercise that.
Yeah. Tell me, how does it work with, you've got this melting pot in the kitchen, not to mix metaphors, but it is. How does that work? And I mean, very different cultures, very different languages, people with different traumas they're coming in with, different numbers of years being here. I mean, does it vary cohort to cohort? Do you find that there's harmony? Is there conflict? What does it look like in the kitchen?
It's always different. And I think it's, I keep going back to one thing we try and really emphasize with our team as a value is that of gratitude. How amazing is it that we get to do a conflict resolution class between people from so many different countries of origin and us who bring our own ways into the kitchen. Yeah. And there are days where sometimes those moments of gratitude can feel a little bit more like a challenge. But sometimes we joke about, there's a great Mother Teresa poem, which the bottom line is to give the world your best anyways. And that means showing up even when it's hard. And there are days in the kitchen that it's not great. Like there's the very tactical. If you confuse sugar and salt, that's really a bummer. It's not great. It happens. And it has happened like so many times. And we laugh about it now because yes, please confuse sugar and salt in our kitchen, not when you're at a Michelin star restaurant in your job interview. And then there are days where cultural norms will butt up against each other. And we have to be aware of what our role is and what power dynamics exist. A good example of this is we work with a lot of individuals from different cultures who have a different approach to women working outside the home. I obviously have an opinion, and we're a workforce organization, and we're very forthcoming about the idea that our goal is workforce participation. But we also have to have the humility to say to students that they know what's best for themselves and that our doors are open, but we're not going to drag you through them. We had a student who was phenomenal, graduated in 2021. And as we got closer to graduation, it became very clear that there was a lot of pressure from home not to continue working outside the home. There was a lot of complicated factors there. We wanted to make sure that we were a resource, but we couldn't push. And I'm grateful that our team took the approach of our door never closes. You have to decide when you want to come through it. 2.5 years later, that student reached out and said that she had left her husband. She was ready to start working and wanted us to work with her. And she's doing great and thriving, and her family is thriving. But it's things like that of recognizing that conflict's real and that people have complex lives, like all of us have. And we shouldn't assume that we know best, because we don't. Everybody needs, like, part of empowerment and human dignity is recognizing that people need to have ownership over their own choices. Not always easy, but it is something we really do try and keep ourselves accountable for.
Yeah. Do your professionals and your staff have training, either cultural training and sensitivity and or mental health backgrounds?
Yes, one of the greatest fortunes of my professional career is that we have people with incredibly specialized skills. So we have a number of social workers. They're really the backbone of this approach, who don't only provide social work for our students, but also do trauma-informed care training to wrap around all of our instructors. So if you're a chef being an instructor in the kitchen, you're also learning about empowerment-based principles and trauma-informed care and how to create a brave space within the kitchen. I am also grateful that we have all these external partners, because we also are able to identify, like, if we are not the right supporter for something, we know how to find the person that is. And so that's been really critical, because some of these, we have some of our staff, our social workers, do have training around, like, mental health support. That is not the same thing as being a specialist in a medical facility around specific types of trauma. But we have partners at Bellevue who are that. And so it's finding that balance of where can we help and where is the way that we help finding more help.
Yeah. At Illuminate, we're so careful about how we curate our cohorts of the collective, and really looking for diversity, people working in different issue areas, different geographies, different ages and whatnot. When you're curating your cohort, are you looking for that diversity, or are you looking for commonalities? I mean, are you limiting the number of people from a certain country or the number of people who are survivors of human trafficking, or are you kind of blind to all of that? Is it important that they have somebody who's gone through a similar experience and is from their country, or that you want to keep it completely wide open to be reaching as many tentacles as possible?
It's such an important question. And it's one that's like you can go either way on it. And so where we've netted out is we have some basic principles. So one of the principles that for us that we have found to be true is that a cohort needs to have no more than 50% of the cohort made up of one single national group. We found that especially if we have like 10 members from one national group and 2 who are not, the barriers there are really unfair to everybody. We think that encouraging diversity within cohorts, what we've seen is that it works out very well, in particular, if we can use this as a safe space for having gender diversity, having linguistic diversity, and having age diversity, those 3 factors, more so than even the lived experience prior to enrolling. It just emulates what one would face in the workforce. We find that sometimes we need to tread lightly on that. And so we do look on a case-by-case basis of how do we empower individuals who might have had a particular experience and mostly like really aggravated trauma, to make sure that the work environment that we're creating at Emma's Torch is a pipeline into the quote unquote real world, but is also a safe space for them. So it's less science, more art, but we are trying to find that diverse makeup that still feels cohesive. And I think I'm still so close with the other members of my cohort. I was actually just emailing with one of them this morning. And I think that something that's powerful is you bring together a diverse group of people and you discover that actually there's so much more in common than you realized before.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Kerry, it's so impressive. And you've had such tremendous success in such a short period of time in New York and in DC, which are 2 key cities for immigration, but there are so many more. Are you looking to replicate this in other cities across the US? Or around the world, even?
Yeah,
I mean, why limit it to the US, really?
Let's take the show on the road. I mean, I had a boss once who used to say, if patience is a virtue, it's not one I have. And that speaks to me. And my grandmother would say the same. I am deeply impatient, and something I'm trying to exercise is patience. We've had what can only be described as constant growth year over year, and not to mention the number of pivots that we had to do during the pandemic to really stay open and available for our students. And so Right now, we are really committed to growing and expanding within DC and New York. We will be hopefully announcing in the next couple of weeks a new program site in New York. That being said, we do get a lot of inquiries from around the country for other cities for whom Emma's Torch could be the right fit. And so a big project right now is to determine, what does that look like? Is it the full, this is the investment to open in a city, this is the timeline, like what we're doing in Washington, DC? Or the other model that we've been testing with a couple of contracts is we can develop curricular materials and programming for other groups to run in their churches, to run in their synagogues, to bring to their organizations, which for us, it's about how do we bring this thing that works? Like fundamentally, we have seen time and again that this is life-changing for our graduates. How do we replicate that quickly, whether it's under the Emma's Torch brand in these big replicable cities, or in this smaller scale, kind of just sharing the knowledge that we have. So while we are very focused right now, we are still fielding and considering inquiries from some other cities, mostly looking at the eastern, like the East Coast, north of New York and a little bit farther south. But we've gotten some requests from across the country and even around the world, but we're mostly focused domestically right now.
So, if you wanted to start a new training program tomorrow or what would it cost?
Yeah. For us, it's about both the resources and time. So in broad strokes, to go into a new city takes between 3 to 5 years to really get up and running and be fully scaled. And what we looked to do for DC was to ensure that we had $3 to $5 million secured in order to go in to get off the ground in a way that was sustainable. So that's been our approach. Some people think it's expensive. I think that it's actually a really reasonable way to change lives and change a community. But it's helpful because it allows us to have the facilities that we need to be able to pay our students from day one. And as I've learned time and again, to ensure that we have the staff that's able to do this work sustainably.
Yeah, I think people need to remember it's not just running a program, you're paying people to do this work. I mean, you're running a business.
Absolutely.
How many staff do you have right now to do the full operations that you run?
Between the two locations, we have 22 members of our team.
And that includes administrative and chefs and everything.
Yeah, everything. We run a light team. We're in that stage of growth where we're going to start making some key investments at what we've been referring to like headquarters level, but really investing a little bit more in some of those functions like development and other pieces to ensure that we're able to keep doing this work long term.
For sure. And right now, where does most of your funding come from?
So right now, most of our funding is from grants, private grants, private foundations, as well as then we do have a big portion from individual donors from major gifts. And then about 35% of our budget is earned revenue. So catering, the restaurants, the cafes, that all of the money that is brought in through that helps to offset the budget as well.
What a great model. Terrific. Is there an advocacy component to your work?
I love this question because I think it's one where the answer has changed most dramatically because of my relationship with Illuminate. And I know she's not here and she's away, but I can hear Ruth Messenger in my head telling me how best to respond, because I would have said previously, no, of course not. We're not an advocacy organization. That's for the politics. We do grassroots. And what Illuminate has taught me and what Ruth has really made clear to me is that everything that we do is advocacy. Opening our doors and having our mission statement in like the entire window. You get off the subway, you are seeing empowering refugees through culinary education. That's a political statement. That is advocacy. That is saying unequivocally, we are here, we are proud of who we are, and we believe that everybody is welcome. And I mentioned earlier, our restaurant partners. I would have never thought that what we're doing is advocacy or organizing, except that then we see our restaurant partners saying, I hired 5 people from Emma's Torch. I'm going to change my HR policies. I'm also going to ask our Small Business Association to do better. And those moments, at least for me, sometimes these big intractable problems can just feel so overwhelming. Like that's for the advocates, that's for the lobbyists, that's for the politicians. And Illuminate and Emma's Torch has helped me see that actually the choices that we make on a day-to-day basis are part of that continuum. I like to tell people who come to buy their coffee at Emma's Torch that it's the most radical thing that they can do before 8 a.m. And I think that's true. And it's not just with Emma's Torch. I think that we all, our buying power, our voices, the platforms we have, the choices we make are all acts of advocacy and acts of protest when we don't like what we're seeing, which I think is very important.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think advocacy can happen, on Capitol Hill or wherever, but if you're influencing the way people are living their lives or the way that an issue is framed, right? Like if people are going to Brooklyn and going to Emma's Torch to get coffee, like they're making choices about who they're supporting. And I think I agree with you. I think it's a great way to have a more grassroots impact, I would say. You've done so much over 7 years. I mean, what are some of your hopes and aspirations for Emma's Torch for like the next 7 years?
I can't believe how much, not just like Emma's Torch has been amazing for 7 years, but wow, it's been a crazy 7 years.
Yeah, with
changed
COVID.
a lot. Yeah, maybe a year or two into Emma's Torch, I was at an event and I mentioned, and somebody asked what I did. I said, oh, I'm the executive director of Emma's Torch. I said, oh, we love Emma's Torch. What do you do there? And that to me was like the most exciting moment, because this idea that Emma's Torch exists separate to me. And I think that as I look to the next 7 years, that's my real hope, is that Emma's Torch becomes and continues to be this community that many people feel ownership over. And so whether that means, as I hope it does, that Emma's Torch is a household name in New York and in DC, and it's your go-to for catering and coffee. And maybe that also means that Emma's Torch has a location in Boston or in Atlanta or in Pittsburgh, whatever it may be, or Philadelphia. Those pieces only happen because more and more people see themselves as the we behind Emma's Torch. And so that's really my hope for the next 7 years, is that that can become even more pronounced. And also selfishly, that means that I get to keep learning from people, which is the best part of my job.
Amazing. Amazing. I'm going to invite anyone, if they have any questions, to put them in the chat, but we always sort of like to come back to, and you've sort of made some mentions along the way about your participation in the collective and how being part of the collective has impacted your leadership. You talked a little bit about Ruth and the advocacy piece, or how you've leveraged the relationships that you've found either within your own cohort or across the other cohorts.
Absolutely. My story with Illuminate began with the Isha Koach grant, which was right when we had just opened Emma's Torch. And I remember walking into my interview and being very nervous, because at that point I'd done a couple of grant interviews, but I was I still do get nervous about these things, but I remember walking in and feeling like I was home. Like the questions I was being asked were not meant to decide whether or not I was worthy, but to see whether or not we could work together. And that's something that I found year over year, whether it was as part of the collective and as part of Illuminate, which I'll get to in a moment, but even just we received the Isha Koach grant. I had the opportunity, Deb hosted her birthday party at Emma's Torch when I was pregnant with my first daughter. So many of the women who I met through that program were like the first people to tell me advice, which was super helpful. And then being part of the collective, I remember seeing a list of names of the extraordinary women who were part of this group, not to mention Ruth Messenger, who I did an AJWS trip when I was 16, and like she changed. I grew up like wanting to one day get the honor of meeting Ruth. And so to have access to these women, to have access to Ruth, to have the incredible team at Illuminate has been an invaluable gift. And I think it's also given us the gift of kind of slowing down. I think that the commitment to really participating in a true curriculum and to showing up for one another has been a real lesson for me in, you can get so involved in every day, your week. It was a chance that we actually had to sit and reflect. We had to actually listen to each other. And we couldn't just show up as our polished selves. We had to show up as the vulnerable selves that we all are. And so I know now that, even though I think our formal cohort is done, we've graduated, which was beautiful and exciting. I have friends and mentors that I can turn to anytime and ask them for that greatest gift, which is the gift of time and guidance. And that to me is just such a unique space. And to have that within a Jewish context, especially for those of us who, even though Emma's Torch is very much tied to my Jewish values, it is not a Jewish organization. And especially over this last year, there have been moments where it's felt like being Jewish has felt very isolating, or very othering. And so to have a Jewish group to wrestle with, those questions and those challenges of how we show up as Jewish women in this space has just been a tremendous gift. And it's one that I know will continue to be part of my life.
Yeah, I love what you had to say. And I think we feel the same way, that we also hope that, that you may graduate from the curriculum, but hopefully you're always part of this network. What you just said led me to one last question I wanted to ask you, because it's really quite important. Like, you are a Jewish woman, you're leading this organization through your Jewish values. You're working in a really progressive space. And we have seen that the progressive spaces have not been so kind to Jews, and have shown a lot of anti-Semitism over the last 9 months. How has that shown up for you in your work?
It's been a really, I don't want to say difficult, because doesn't amount to difficult compared to what so many other people are going through, but it's been really eye-opening. I made myself a promise on October 7th that I was going to change a key behavior. And that behavior for me was, I'd always worked in progressive spaces before starting Emma's Torch as a human rights campaign. And this isn't a critique of the HRC or anything else, but there's definitely a mentality of, you check your Zionism at liberals' door. And I don't want to make people uncomfortable. So I worked at an embassy, not the Israeli embassy. My husband served in a military. His name's Tomer Yavitz. He served in the IDF. And I decided, the promise I made to myself and to my children was, I wasn't going to allow that anymore. That's unacceptable to me. My Zionism informs my progressive values. I am a staunch advocate for refugees for the same reason that I'm a Zionist. And it's been eye-opening for two reasons. One of them has been hard. I've kind of had to set boundaries around what types of things I will and won't tolerate. I've had to be in rooms with people who say things that are absolutely objectionable and are, so the only acceptable form of bigotry. And at the same time, I've also tried to be open and honest about who I am. But the other thing that's come up, a big portion of our work is in partnership with synagogues and other Jewish community organizations who have always been the staunchest advocates for refugees. I mean, Hayes, Emma Lazarus, you want to write the story of refugees in the United States, it's Jews leading this charge. And I've been hearing from people this idea of, but our progressive allies are turning their backs on us. Why should we keep showing up? And there's an incredible rabbi at Central Synagogue, Rabbi Hilly, one of our key partners. And very early on, it must have been in November, she and I had a great conversation, and she instilled in me the idea that in moments like this, where it feels like people are turning their backs on us, we have to keep showing them our faces. This is what it means to be a liberal, Zionist, progressive ally. This is what it means to be a Jew. And you can turn your back on me, but that's not going to change my values. And so I'm very grateful to have had the incredible support of other synagogue groups, Illuminate. I went to a Jewish day school, so that's been a really great source of strength. And it's been an eye-opening experience, but one where it's showed me other people's true colors, but also in a beautiful way, the true colors of a lot of wonderful allies that we have.
Yeah, that's great. I see that someone's put in the chat a question about how being and working and collaborating with other cohort members or collective members, if not only your cohort, has sort of impacted your professional development. I mean, do you feel that being in a group with other CEOs and hearing about their experiences has reshaped how you might do things? I'm sure it goes vice versa, I'm sure it's reciprocal.
Oh, absolutely. Not only within the curriculum, I feel like whenever we were brought together in New York, I would go running with Brodie, who runs Unchained at Last, or I would grab Leela, who is the outgoing executive director of Co-op Dayton, and I would power walk around the city. These women have changed not just the specifics of professional development, but even the questions to ask. I'm kind of early on in my journey, but one of the members of our cohort was transitioning out of her organization. And so hearing from her about what did it look like looking back 23 years later, or what are the questions that she wishes she was asking when she was in my shoes. I have learned so much from that. And something that I've valued about Illuminate is that it's not just we have the curriculum and there is funding for the organization, but there's also this very big emphasis on professional development. And it's the first time that I've taken that seriously. Not only, I kind of had this mentality of fake it till you make it, find smarter people and just scramble. And Illuminate was like, no, there's actual skills here. There are tools. There are people with those tools who can share them. And so that's been a huge shift for me and has really changed how I think about professional development and about, mentorship with these other women.
How did you choose to spend your professional development funding? Did you get a coach or?
I did. Rachel Siegel had like 5,000 emails from me because this was the first time that's like, oh, I have something to spend on me. It's like, what am I doing? So I've been working with a coach, and I also was able to take a writing class because so much of our work is storytelling and advocacy around the stories of our students. And so being able to put pen to paper to that felt really important. And that's just been incredibly beneficial to me as a leader, and just for the sustainability of the organization.
Yeah. Kerry, it has been such a pleasure, as always, talking to you. And I'm going to give a plug. I'm sure, Rachel, people, if you need a caterer for an event that you're hosting, please call Emma's Torch. It's just a privilege to support the really important work that you're doing. That we as Jews, I think, being, strangers in a strange land, can totally appreciate. So thank you so much. I'm going to welcome back Rachel Siegel to close us out.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you so much, Kerry, for taking the time to be with us and sharing your story and your wisdom. I've been thinking about you a lot as I watch The Bear at home and all the intricacies of your industry. We're so proud to support you and your leadership and Emma's Torch's incredible work. And thank you always to Rachel for leading us through this incredible conversation. We hope that you will visit Emma's Torch's website to learn more about Kerry's ongoing work, visit one of her restaurants in New York or in Washington, D.C., or like Rachel said, use them as a caterer for your next event. Please also sign up for Illuminate's newsletters so that you continue to hear about events such as this one. We're really excited, in case you missed it, to announce the 6th cohort of the collective, another cohort of incredible Jewish women leaders. We're putting a link in the chat so that you can read more about them and familiarize yourself with their work. And we look forward to giving you opportunities to meet them soon and hear their stories. We offer these sessions at no cost to you. As a nonprofit committed to women's advancement, we count on generous donors to power our network and ask that you consider supporting Illuminate and our work to advance Jewish women leaders. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you stay cool, and we look forward to seeing you very soon.